Good morning, everybody. We know now when the sermon is over. It's when Miss Jean stands up. Because she stood up, it was time then. I've heard about people complaining maybe about the length of sermons. I've never seen anybody just protest it by standing up. So, class don't end with a song, so I'm good. So. But talking about rebellion, wow. That leads us good right into our lesson. Acts chapter 6 is where we left off. Can everybody hear me? You can't? I didn't know if that was... Okay, there you go. All right. Acts chapter 6 is where we left off. Hey, Miss Janice. And we had looked through there and we had seen 7 men chosen for a special work, and we discussed that. It doesn't say they were deacons, but it indicates that that's what they were. And because the Hellenistic Jews were being overlooked in the daily distribution, so included in that list of good people that were selected was a man named Stephen. And Stephen, for some reason I get Stephen and Philip mixed up. Don't ask me why, but I do. But anyway, Stephen was one of the 7 that were chosen. And it says that he was a man full of the Holy Spirit and wisdom. And it turns out that he was the first martyr for Jesus Christ here. And we're going to read about this. This is very interesting because a lot of this lesson goes good with what the excellent sermon Mike delivered today. I mean, talking about, rejection and everything of Christ. We look into this rejection of the Jews of Christ. And, a lot of times it is confusing because we look back and we see miracles performed, and I've had the question asked, why was Jesus rejected by his own? And that could go into a lot of time there. But sometimes people expect something, and they get something different than what they expect or what they desire, and pride enters into things. There's something really true about spiritual blindness. We've all seen it to some degree in our lives. There's spiritual blindness, and it comes through because of our will and what we do. Sometimes we may look at something in the Bible and know it and look at it, but it just don't sink in. And I think that's what a lot of the things that the Jewish people here in these times that were persecuting Christians were in a bad state of spiritual blindness. They looked past the prophecies. They looked for the Messiah to be someone that would take over like a military king. And when Christ when he came to earth, he wasn't like that. And they rejected him. So now, Stephen, they have told the apostles and people speaking for Christ and to not speak in his name. And it says in chapter 6 of Acts, and starting at verse 7, then the word of God spread, and the number of disciples multiplied greatly in Jerusalem, and a great many of the priests were obedient to the faith. So you even have the Jewish priests that are being converted here, and that's great. I said last week as we ended, sometimes we might, in our minds, give up on people because of their background. And that's not for us to decide for anybody. It doesn't matter what kind of sinner they are, what kind of religion or non-religion they come from. The gospel has the power to change anybody as long as they'll let it. As long as they're willing to accept what Christ tells them and they obey it. So we shouldn't try to judge who's gets the gospel and who doesn't, or what we might think about it. A great many of the priests were obedient to the faith, and it says, and Stephen, there he is again. There's that man Stephen, one of those 7 chosen. It shows that here he was a preacher of the gospel too. And it says, and Stephen, full of faith and power, did great wonders and signs among the people. There it is again. They're seeing this power displayed in certain people, and Stephen was one. Then there arose some from what is called the synagogue of freedmen, Syrians, Alexandrians, and those from Cilicia and Asia, disputing with Stephen. Now this was a synagogue of the Jews, and it looked like they were Hellenistic also, that they had the Greek-speaking language. They were slaves somewhere, probably, in the Roman Empire, and they were a Jewish synagogue here. So, but they were composed of a lot of different dispersed people. And it says, and they, in verse 10, this is important, it says, and they were not able to resist the wisdom and the spirit by which he spoke. Then they secretly induced men to say, and we'll get to that in a second. Well, right off the bat they're speaking with him. Stephen's teaching them and speaking on the name about Christ. And it says that they were not able to resist the wisdom and the spirit by which he spoke. I know that you all have experienced this in the course of your life. I have. Is sometimes, and it has been in my life, I'm kind of like a broken watch. I'm even right twice a day sometimes, So, but when somebody has wisdom from the scriptures, or as he had from the Spirit, and people are not able to resist it, they turn to other means and ways of attack. Where they should submit to something when they know they're wrong, they're angriest, they rebel the most when they know they can't overcome what the person's saying. And I've told y'all before, one time I got angry with an officer when I was working, and it turns out the reason I was angry is because they were right about what they said about me. It made me angry. Have you ever been there before? You know, somebody says something and you don't like it, but they're right. And I went back finally and I said, hey, I'm sorry because you were right. I just didn't like what you said. But that's the way human nature is. But you know what? It can be taken so far. And so here's what they did. They couldn't resist Stephen. So they said this. Then they secretly induced men to say, we have heard him speak blasphemous words against Moses and God. Now unfortunately, I've never, in my law enforcement career, almost 30 years, I never saw or had indication of seeing someone plant evidence. It has happened. There's corrupt people all through positions of authority. Always has been. And sometimes when people want something to happen, they make it happen. You know what I mean? So that could happen. And there's nothing scarier than people that are in authority that would lie and be dishonest in that way, because your freedom is, or maybe your lives are entrusted to them. So the main thing you want to do is tell the truth, but what did they do? They planted evidence, so to speak. They induced people to say, we've heard him speak blasphemous words against Moses and God, and they stirred up the people, the elders and the scribes, and they came upon him, seized him, and brought him to the council. They also set up false witnesses who said this man does not cease to speak blasphemous words against this holy place and the law. For we have heard him say that Jesus of Nazareth will destroy this place, change the customs which Moses delivered to us. And all who sat in the council looked steadfastly at him, saw his face as the face of an angel. Well, when you set up false witnesses, that's exactly what it is. You say this, I don't care if it's true or not, you make it sound this way so that we can get this result. Setting up false witnesses is terrible. And it says here, but when they looked at him, in verse 15, I think this is interesting. It says, all who sat in the council looked steadfastly at him and saw his face as the face of an angel. Now, I don't know exactly what that was. I don't know if there was something that was supernatural that they saw, like when Moses' face shone. I don't think so. I could be wrong. I kind of think about it this, and maybe you have a different thought about it, but, I've had the opportunity to question a lot of people. Truth has a certain look to it. It really does. Sometimes it's called facial expression. Sometimes it's body language. But, I've sat down with people before across the table, and I think I've got somebody here that has done a crime. And I interviewed them. And as I talked to them, I'm thinking to myself, this person didn't do anything. Because truth has a certain look about it. I think what they're seeing here is a man that's confident in what he's saying. He's speaking truth. And when they look at him, they see this. Somebody that's speaking righteous, but they're still attacking him. But whatever it means, we can't certainly know for sure. But Luke has written something here that we may not completely understand, but he records what happened. And it says this, and starting at chapter 7, this is a rather lengthy chapter. And needless to say, we can't get through it all today. But what this is really a great history lesson in the Old Testament all the way up to their time. And it's really, if you went through all of it, you could make a whole series of class on this one chapter, because it gives a great summary of the Old Testament. Israel was a type of the church. Moses, as we'll say, also was a type of Christ. He mediated for the people. He led the people. And we'll see this as we go. But let's start reading a little bit. It says, chapter 1, then the high priest said, are these things so? Now, these people have accused him of all these things. And the high priest asked him, are they so? That looks like a yes or no answer. Sometimes when I want to laugh or get angry, I'll watch some of the videos of Congress, congressional hearings. And both sides do. It's funny because they'll ask somebody a question that's a yes or no question, and they'll start off with a summary, and they'll stop them and say, that's a yes or no. Well, and they'll have that battle every single time. Because one, they don't want to say yes or no because they want to sometimes wiggle around the answer. And the people asking it just want them to say yes or no so they can move on. So it's really funny, but right here is exactly kind of one of these instances. But you know, Stephen was pretty wise. It says he was full of wisdom. I think he saw the, quote, handwriting on the wall here. So he didn't answer with a yes or no, but he went into a lesson for the people that were accusing him. And they didn't stop him. And it's the longest recorded speech here in the New Testament. But he begins back and he says in verse 2, and he said, "Brethren and fathers, listen." So he calls them, his Jewish brethren, and fathers. He's connected with them. "The God of glory appeared to our father Abraham when he was in Mesopotamia, before he dwelt in Haran. And he said to him, Get out of your country and from your relatives, and come to a land that I will show you." I recall, I don't know where it was, but you know, you think about teachers and those good teachers that we have that are teaching on the other side of the wall we can't see, that we're so thankful for, that they teach our young children. I remember a teacher somewhere talking about this verse every time I read it, and emphasizing the faith that it would have to leave your home at the direction of God, and Him not give you any details about what was going to happen. Pure faith. And so the faith of Abraham once again started with leaving his home. Yeah, I'm a person that I like to stick close to things that are familiar with me. And I would say this would stress me out quite a bit, just this. So he did, and he's talking to him about Abraham. So it says, "Then he came out of the land of the Chaldeans and dwelt in Haran. And from there, when his father was dead, he moved him to this land in which you now dwell. And God gave him no inheritance in it, not even enough to set his foot on. But even when Abraham had no child, he promised to give it to him for a possession, and to his descendants after him." Now we have Abraham being told that you're going to have all these descendants. He don't even have a child. But God spoke in this way, that his descendants would dwell in a foreign land, and that they would bring them into bondage and oppress them 400 years. This is prophecy again. He was foretelling what would happen, and we know that the people of Israel would be in bondage in Egypt 400 years. "And the nation to whom they would be in bondage, I will judge." We see this through Exodus, that God is judging the Egyptians through all these plagues he sends on them. "I will judge," said God, "and after they shall come out and serve me in this place." Then he gave him the covenant of circumcision. And so Abraham begot Isaac, and circumcised him on the 8th day. And Isaac begat Jacob, and Jacob begat the 12 patriarchs. And, you know, the little hidden gems we'll just throw out there. I always say that 8th day of circumcision was without, you know, the medical knowledge that we have today where we can treat things. By nature, without those things, the 8th day was the perfect day to circumcise a male, because this is the day that blood clotting is at its very best. This is just another hidden gem of science in the Bible, that God instructs the 8th day for a reason, because this is the best way that these children could heal after the circumcision. It says in verse 9, "And the patriarchs, becoming envious, sold Joseph into Egypt." There's pride again, and envy always makes people turn on others, just as we're seeing here. "But God was with him and delivered him out of all his troubles, and gave him favor and wisdom in the presence of Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And he made him governor over Egypt and all his house." We're seeing the providence of God unfold, and that is so amazing to me. I don't know how amazing it is to you and how often you think about it, but it's interesting how God allows us our own free will actions. He doesn't make us choose one way or the other. It's totally up to us. But God, being so wise and knowing all things, and in his providence works everything according to his will. It's just amazing. The whole story of the Bible is the will of God being played out without, in one way, getting in the way of the free will of the humans that he created. says, now a famine and great trouble came over all the land of Egypt and Canaan, and our fathers found no sustenance. But when Jacob heard that there was grain in Egypt, he sent out our fathers first. And the second time Joseph was made known to his brothers, and Joseph's family became known to the Pharaoh. So we know the story. Joseph, was taken by his brothers. He was sold over to Egypt. But he gained a prominent position in Egypt. And now there's a famine in the land, so Jacob sends, and they want to get food. So, and Joseph's in control of all this. So ultimately, the family is revealed, and they see that it's Joseph. And it says, then Joseph sent and called his father Jacob and all his relatives to him, 75 people. So Jacob went down to Egypt, and he died, he and our fathers, and they were carried back to Shechem and laid in the tomb that Abraham bought for a sum of money from the sons of Hamor, the father of Shechem. So he's given them the history lesson that they well know. And it says in verse 17, but when the time of the promise drew near, which God had sworn to Abraham, the people grew and multiplied in Egypt, till another king arose who did not know Joseph. And Joseph found favor with that first Pharaoh, but things change. What's going along real good one minute seems to change in the next. Things don't stay the same. There was somebody that had no regard for Joseph that rose up. This man, in verse 19, dealt treacherously with our people and oppressed our forefathers, making them expose their babies so that they may not live. At this time Moses was born and was well pleasing to God, and he was brought up in his father's house for 3 months. But when he set out, Pharaoh's daughter took him away and brought him up as her own son. All these things, just the providence of God happening through all of this. Moses, in the ark of bulrushes were protected going down the water, and Pharaoh's daughter takes him in. And Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was mighty in words and deeds. He was raised there in Egypt, and it says that he was mighty in words and deeds, educated. Verse 23, now when he was 40 years old, it came into his heart to visit his brethren, the children of Israel. And seeing one of them suffer wrong, he defended and avenged him who was oppressed and struck down the Egyptian. For he supposed that his brethren would have understood that God would deliver them by his hand, but they did not understand. Moses here killed a man. And that is something when you really think about it. And what he may have gone through. And we read over some things in the Bible because it's reading, but he actually murdered this man here. And verse 26, and the next day he appeared to 2 of them as they were fighting, 2 brethren, tried to reconcile them, saying, men, you are brethren. Why do you wrong one another? But he who did his neighbor wrong pushed him away, saying, who made you a ruler and judge over us? Did you not want to kill me? Do you want to kill me as you did the Egyptian yesterday? Now, what would you feel like if somebody all of a sudden just told you about witnessing your homicide? That's scary. That's scary. And because sometimes we think things aren't known, but then there may be witnesses. And we always know we have one witness, Jesus Christ. No matter what we do or in life, where we go, what we say, there's always a witness there that's saying everything. I was walking by a car, it just popped in my mind yesterday, over where my mom stays. It had all kinds of stickers on it. And it was just full of stickers. There's a van, and inside stuff was hanging off the mirror, and there was a little emblem of Jesus with a message that said, I saw that. You remember that van? I forgot to tell you about that was inside of it. But you know what? That's really right. Jesus sees it. So, but anyway, it says in verse 29, then at the same Moses fled. He got out of there because he knows there was witnesses to what happened, and became a dweller in the land of Midian, where he had 2 sons. And when 40 years had passed, now he was 40 years when this happened, now 40 years passed. Now, I'm not a mathematician, but how old is that? 80. I was listening to a preacher at Lebanon Road, J.D. Buckner, one day talk about Moses being 80 when he really began his work. And that made an impact on me. Because sometimes we think, oh, we're too old. Well, he was 80. And at that time, I was like 40. And I was thinking, or maybe a little more, but I thought about that a lot and think it's never too late to really start doing the work of the Lord. So here he is at 80 years old. It says, because when 40 years had passed, and an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire and a bush in the wilderness of Mount Sinai. When Moses saw it, he marveled at the sight. As he drew near to observe, the voice of the Lord came to him. That's one of the accounts in the Bible that really, it really makes me think, I go back and I try to imagine what he saw. Because he encounters the Lord here, and there's a good case of study that this angel of the Lord that appears all throughout the Old Testament is the pre-incarnate Jesus Christ. There's a lot of good reasons for that, because he accepts worship and such, and there's a whole study on that, but because he hears the voice of the Lord coming from this. But there's a bush here burning, and it's not being consumed. I mean, when something's burning and you look at it, you expect it to start breaking down. This is not happening. He's saying something here. And the voice came, it says, and the voice of the Lord came to him, saying, I am the God of your fathers. And that's another subtle thing there. He didn't say, I was the God of your fathers. I am the God of your fathers. We think about people being dead and gone, but when you think about the transfiguration, where Christ appeared, who appeared with him? Moses and Elijah. That's right. Now, he's still their God, and they're still living. Their soul is. So, I am is also used in the divine sense because that's the eternal nature of God. And Jesus said, before Abraham was, I am. Eternal existence. And it says, I am the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses trembled and dared not look. Then the Lord said to him, take your sandals off your feet, for the place where you stand is holy ground. Now, we're deep into the history summary of Israel. But don't forget who's speaking to who here. Stephen is speaking to the Jews. And they worshiped in the temple. The temple. And that's where God's presence was said to have been. Solomon, back when he dedicated the temple, spoke, in other words, can you really be bound by the temple? That's a paraphrase. And I think there's a lesson here being sent out to the Jews that you can't confine God, can't limit God. God is everywhere. Wherever God is and wherever you're worshiping God or encounter God is holy ground. They weren't standing in a temple here, they were standing by a bush. But God's presence was there, and he says, I have surely seen the oppression of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their groanings and have come down to deliver them. And now, come, I will send you to Egypt. Now, we say a lot of times that there's something, a fancy word called typology. Well, it's just a type of what's going to happen. Israel of old becomes new Israel. The church is referred to as Israel of God because it is a type of what's to come. The church is the type of the old Israel. And Jesus came to us when he heard our groanings because Israel needed deliverance and people today need deliverance from sin. So he hears our groanings today, the groanings of sin, and the grace of God has come so that we can have forgiveness of sins. But he's speaking of the history here, and he says, now come, I will send you to Egypt. He's speaking to Moses. This Moses whom they rejected, saying, who made you a ruler and judge? Is the one God sent to be a ruler and a deliverer by the hand of the angel who appeared to him in the bush. He brought them out after he had shown wonders and signs in the land of Egypt and in the Red Sea and in the wilderness 40 years. God delivered his people from Egypt. Those plagues were sent on Egypt, on Pharaoh. Finally, they were let go. The Egyptians pursued them. And then as they passed through the Red Sea, the waters was divided. God closed the waters in on them. They still didn't give up until they perished there in the water. So he's telling them about all this, that God delivered them, and they got them through the wilderness there. He's giving them a history of their people. Now it says in verse 37, this is that Moses who said to the children of Israel, the Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from your brethren, him you shall hear. Who do you think he's talking about? Jesus Christ. This is he who was in the congregation in the wilderness with the angel who spoke to him on Mount Sinai, and with our fathers, the one who received the living oracles to give us, whom our fathers would not obey but rejected. Now he's going back to the rejection even of their forefathers there in the wilderness. Complaints, rebellion. And in their hearts they turned back to Egypt, saying to Aaron, make us gods to go before us. As for this Moses who brought us out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. And they made a calf in those days, offered sacrifices to the idol, and rejoiced in the work of their own hands. Moses went on the mountain. He was gone just a little while. And they asked Aaron to make them this idol, this calf. Then God turned and gave them up to worship the host of heaven, as it is written in the book of the prophets. Well, God once again gives people up to do their own free will. And we see this a lot in the New Testament where it uses that language, God gave them up. Sometimes God withdraws and says, have at it. Your will be done. But there'll be consequences. Did you offer my slaughtered animals and sacrifices during the 40 years in the wilderness of the house of Israel? You also took up the tabernacle of Moloch and the star of the god Remphan, images which you made to worship. I will carry you away beyond Babylon. Our fathers had the tabernacle of witness in the wilderness, as he appointed, instructing Moses to make it according to the pattern that he had seen, which our fathers, having received it in turn, also brought with Joshua into the land possessed by the Gentiles, whom God drove out before the face of our fathers until the days of David, who found favor before God and asked to find a dwelling for God of Jacob, but Solomon built the house for him. Do you remember why? When David's desire was to build a temple as a dwelling place for God. And why does it say David wasn't allowed to do it? Did somebody say? Say he was a man of blood, man of war. And he wanted a king in the time of peace to build this temple. However, the Most High does not dwell in temples made with hands, as the prophet says. Now he's going back again. He's talking to these Jews. God is in the hearts of people. You can't capture him in the temple. He does not dwell in temples made with hands. And we see this statement on by Paul in Acts chapter 17. Heaven is my throne, and earth is my footstool. This is God talking. What house will you build for me, says the Lord? Or what is the place of my rest? Has my hand not made all these things? Now he's saying God has made everything. What are you going to make that God's going to be lesser than? He's created everything. Then, and I know the bell's about to ring, but this gets to the turning point. Now he's delivered their history to them. But now this is where the hard preaching comes in. He said, you stiff-necked and uncircumcised in heart and ears, you always resist the Holy Spirit as your fathers did, so do you. Wow. You talk about preaching that steps on toes. He called them stiff-necked. They bow up against God, so to speak.